Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are here this evening with episode 41 of the Help Action series here on the channel. This is a show where we invite a guest on and we kind of pick a topic to discuss. We do a little bit of the discussion, a little bit of the interview, and we take questions from you as the audience and answer them as best we can. But I'm really excited. Obviously, you can see tonight's episode, we are going to be discussing holidays and festivals because it is that time of year, whether you celebrate Hanukkah or Christmas or Kwanzaa or any other of the varied winter holidays that people kind of practice around the world, or you don't partake of any of them, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, it's holiday season here in the good old US of A. And I'm really excited to welcome my guest on this evening. With me tonight is Ben Buckner. So, Ben, you son of a bitch, how are you?
Doing all right.
Excellent, excellent. Why don't you tell the people where they can find you on the internet, what kind of stuff you get up to, etc., and then we'll kind of kick this thing down the hill.
Sure. You can find I am the creator owner of Buckstar Games. You can find buckstargames.com as well as Buckstar Games at Twitter and on Facebook. I've written two supplements so far. One being Hexpedition: Jaws of the King, and the other one that just came out this past August, Barganomicon Volume 1.
Yeah, that second book is the one that I've looked at the most between those two, and it's got some just fantastic stuff in it. Honestly, like some really creative NPCs and magic items and stuff that you can use in 5e. I'm magic items is kind of like a thing for me. It's always been a part of the game that I've really enjoyed designing and coming up with fun, creative ways to kind of make something special that I can put into my players' hands, and having a resource material that I can go to find other examples of ways to incorporate things into the game is always really helpful. You should be able to find the links that Ben mentioned in the description of the video down below. If you have the time, please do go check out his stuff. It is incredible. Show him some love. Throw him some cash. Yeah, man. I'm really excited. I love talking about RPGs. That's the whole genesis of this show. And you're not a person that I've had a lot of opportunity to kind of get down and talk to until recently, whenever we got to hang out in person, which was a really fun night of the longest game of Ticket to Ride ever.
Did it ever finish?
It did. I won. Nobody's counting. Keeping score. I won.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that was a very long game, but it was really cool. It was nice to kind of get down, get to sit down and talk to you, and as well as Bill and Dave, as always, and my wife. I mean, she's okay, but if you're watching this, Jamie, I love you. No, man. I always love meeting people in our community. It's always really cool to see the different kinds of things that have brought people to this space, and the different values and different angles that people like look at things, and the different walks of life and the different experiences. It creates a really cool melting pot, honestly, that I find is always fascinating. So having these kinds of conversations is great, because I not only get to talk about gaming, but I also get to know someone a little bit. So I'm really excited that you agreed to be my guest this evening.
Oh yeah, I'm glad to be here, man.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. One of the first things that I like to typically ask my guests is, when and how did you stumble into gaming? How did you find this hobby?
Okay, so originally I was a tabletop war gamer. About 20 years ago, I got into it when I was really young. I got like some Warhammer for Christmas because I was always into models and stuff. And then they got me that, and that's just a huge money pit of activities. But I meet other people that played it. And then that was like when I was 13, and then via one of the people I met through that was Will Pagani, who works at Atomic Mass Games that does the Marvel Crisis Protocol stuff now. And he invited me to do his 3.5 game, which was really fun. It was the first time I got to play. And then that was like the first time I got to play. And then kind of in a short span there, one of my friends' dads also invited me to play with them. And then he wasn't feeling well one day. And I was like, I can do a dungeon real quick. And I've never done it before. I borrowed his books and I put together a simple little dungeon, and everyone really liked it. And I've been DMing since then. So for not quite 15 years now. So
That's awesome. That's almost always the best way to wind up being a dungeon master, is to, because someone else won't, or someone else typically does and isn't there, but everybody still wants to play. It's a really fun way to kind of back up into dungeon mastering. And typically, and I've said this a few times here on the show before, like the best thing that can teach you about how to be a dungeon master is to play the game, and vice versa. The best thing that'll teach you how to play the game is to run it. And I fully support dungeon masters being players, and players also being dungeon masters. I think that's crucial to understanding what you like and what you don't like at the table. Nothing will teach it to you faster than seeing somebody else at the table going, I don't like that. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's cool. 15 years. That's awesome. 3.5 was definitely, we played a lot of like what we call 3.25. We started with 3rd edition, and then when 3.5 came out, we kind of looked at what they had and we're like, well, okay, some of these are good changes, but some of the rest of it's not something we want to mess with.
Monkey grip.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we played 3rd edition for a long time. We skipped over 4th edition, and then picked up 5th edition shortly after it came out. Yeah, it's been.
I actually DM'd in 4th edition for the first time. Like the first time I did it, I DM'd in 4th edition. So
oh yeah,
it was. I think it gets. Like I understand people's complaints about it, but I do think it's just one of those things where it's kind of like the Nickelback of rules, where it's just fun to hate on, kind of such. You know what I'm talking about? Like it's not actually that bad. It's just like it's just this one thing, and then everyone through hearsay is just kind of like, oh yeah, and it's like, you actually never played 4th edition, did you? It's like, no, but I heard about it. I'm like, okay, it's a little different. It's not for everyone, but it's not. I don't think it should be as demonized as it is.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a WotC product, so it's really easy for people to shit on a target that big. People want Dungeons and Dragons to trip up and fail, because it's such an icon. It's such a massive behemoth that people in the other realms, the other circles, kind of throw a lot of shade towards D&D, and some of it's due and some of it's not. But yeah, I didn't care for 4th edition very much. I didn't really ever play it, but I definitely stole things from it. I still use minions and skill challenges in 5th edition.
Yeah, minions is definitely like really useful. Even I did it even without realizing, oh wait, this is just the minion rule.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's the kind of thing where I don't know. I have better things to do than to hate on other people having a good time doing something. Like, yeah, I don't have that much time.
Yeah, if it's not for you, move on. Not a big deal.
Yep, exactly. I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to go around and say, I don't like that.
Like, I mean,
what's that going to do?
The only thing that really deserves that may be Thaco.
See, I even like Thaco. It has a special place in my heart. Okay. I learned to play with 1st edition, so it'll always have kind of a special place in my heart. But do I miss Thaco? No.
The nostalgia,
right where it is. Yep, in nostalgia, it can just stay there and sleep happily.
Good times. Just stay back there.
You did your duty, soldier. Rest now. So before we get too deep into this, and before we kind of get into why holidays and festivals are important to include in our settings and games, I think it might be a good idea to at least briefly touch on the purpose that these things serve in real life.
Mhm.
So, why is it that we as humans across the globe and in every culture ever recorded celebrate these kinds of traditions?
It's a way to like interrupt the usual flow of things. Um, and it's you have people who go out and harvest things, and then they have a harvest festival. It's something to look forward to. It's like a future thing to anticipate. Also helps with the passage of time. Like one of the biggest things is like the celebration of the new year. Almost every culture has their own specific new year, and it's very rarely on the same actual day. We here in the Western world really are like January 1st, and it's like, okay, go look at other cultures and see when their New Year's is, and it's like it's not January 1st. So
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember what culture it is that celebrated it with spring. I want to say it might have been like the Celtic
uh,
peoples typically
I
celebrated the first of the year.
I I I am in no way an expert, and I think
Neither am I. Welcome to the show.
I'm vaguely remembering. I believe the Jewish New Year is like the beginning of March. It does. I don't think
Might
it
be.
falls on the same day every year, but it is like in March at the marking of spring. I think that's when. Again, not an expert. If I'm wrong, I'm totally wrong. I'm willing to admit that. Uh, I'm not like the rest of Texas. Uh, but yeah.
We got deep cuts, everybody. Watch out. It's fine. I'm in Texas too, and
Yeah.
it's true. Um, no, I agree. I think that it's a passage of time is absolutely one way of looking at a lot of the holidays and festivals that we know,
Mhm.
and it's interesting that you mentioned like something to look forward to. It's not something that I had really thought about whenever I was kind of putting together the questions and stuff for this, but it's absolutely true. Human beings were very goal oriented
Mhm.
creatures. It's very helpful to have a short term goal that you can build towards and then achieve. It's very good for your psyche, which is why playing role playing games a lot of the times is so good for you, because you can have a goal, level up to level 5, and when I hit level 5 I'm going to do this with my character. I can see it. It's a goal I can aim for and then eventually hit, and then I feel successful, and that
Mhm.
helps boost your confidence. So I think festivals and holidays absolutely could fulfill that kind of same thing. It's the we're working towards something by doing all of this, by pulling in this harvest. Not only, yes, will it feed us, but it breaks the monotony of doing that year round. To now we know exactly what night that this is happening, and we're building towards something. Um, yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think too, um, it's also it it's a way to break up that mundane everyday life.
Yeah.
It's something different. It's something to talk about the rest of the year. It's something to remember, and a way to forge memories. I think there's a lot of reason. I think that probably goes into a lot of the reason behind the traditions and things that fall in
Oh
with a
yeah.
lot of these holidays and spirits, festivals. But yeah, it's a really interesting kind of thought experiment. Kind of which came first, and the reasons why, and kind of trying to retrofit that for your games.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm just going to shoot down here. What holidays and festivals from the real world are your favorites, and why or why not?
All of them. No. I mean, I like a good Halloween. I do a monthly like horror movie marathon every October. I I really like Christmas. but I think my favorite one is actually probably New Year's. New Year's seems to have, at least for me, I had all my best like party stories or just enjoyable stories come from like New Year's parties. And one of the biggest parts of that is growing up, my grandfather would go and spend an exorbitant amount of money on fireworks. And I know fireworks is not for everyone. There's a lot of stuff going on with that, and that's but for me it's the memory of shooting fireworks off with my grandfather. And that's that'll never be not be fun or memorable to me. And it doesn't have like New Year's doesn't have it, at least to me, it doesn't feel like it has all the pressures of like Thanksgiving or Christmas, where all the family's there and it's like, okay, all the food's got to be here, all the decorations got to be up, all this, that, and the other. It's like all this stuff that you've got to deal with. By New Year's, a lot of people that you probably don't care for have left your house. Uh, and I mean, let's be honest, there's something to be said about just enjoying an alcoholic beverage, and it's be safe, drink responsibly, Budweiser, blah blah blah. But like it is like it is the tradition to drink and be ready for the new year, and you're usually spending that time with friends or at least people you do like. You're not like, oh, it's not like an obligation to spend time with people like your family members or your racist aunt or anything like that. It's just a fun time to have with people you do care about and want to move forward into the future with.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. And New Year's is very, very much kind of that same thing with me and my group of friends. We usually get together and we do fireworks a lot of the times. We usually kind of go on a little bit of a mini retreat, and we play Dungeons and Dragons all weekend and shoot fireworks and take turns cooking for each other and that kind of stuff. So it's a really good time of year for us. We typically do the same thing for 4th of July. I'm not like a huge like patriot nut, but I enjoy celebrating the time off of work, and sometimes it's good just to celebrate things with friends. But definitely. I'm kind of the same way. I don't buy into most of the things that kind of drive the holidays typically. A lot of the meanings behind them and the faith and things, that's not really just a part of my life. But I very much enjoy the spirit of most of the holidays. One of the best things about Christmas is that people tend to be less dicky towards each other. Yeah, maybe even just a little bit. Not in the stores, maybe. But,
yeah, not in retail,
right? But for the most part, people try to be a little bit nicer, and I enjoy that. I like seeing people kind of shift for just a little while, and again, just getting to spend time with people and gift exchange. While yes, it is nice to receive presents, it's really just kind of fun to surprise other people with something that's thoughtful, and to be surprised by something that is given that's thoughtful. That's the part that's really enjoyable about Christmas. But
yeah, I think some of my friends might confirm it. I don't know, but I really like giving gifts to people, and I always try to put maybe like it doesn't have to be expensive to be a good gift. Like it can be personable or something handcrafted or something like that.
Definitely, here we're big about that here in our house as well. My wife had her mom had a pretty rural. Our mom and dad both had a pretty rural upbringing, so they do a lot of like farming and stuff on their acre, and they raise a lot of their own herbs and tomatoes and that kind of stuff. So they do a lot of handmade gifts and things and baskets and stuff. It's always been kind of cool to watch them prepare, even though it is a ton of work. And that kind of goes back into what you were saying earlier about the pressure of the holiday, which is always a double-edged sword. It's not always great. Okay, so obviously, like the denizens of the worlds where we set the kinds of games that we play, they have their holidays and their festivals that they observe. But what what purpose does it serve within the scope of a given game to include these? Like, why would you touch on these at all in a role-playing game?
I think it's a good way to kind of going back to the breaking up the monotony is kind of like giving a palate cleanser or like a specific kind of role playing opportunity to them. Like everyone can kind of figure out how does your character react in a dark dungeon with bad guys. How does your character react during this holiday in a town? Like how do they celebrate? What's their and it's like a bigger version of like a party, like an actual like festival party thing is something that you can explore as a character. And it's also a really cool way for if you have like low level adventurers or whatever, you can get someone important down amongst like people. Like so if like the governor of like a city, if he's out in the parade, he's much easier to get access to like talk for a minute, or probably even be more amicable to a party of being like, oh hey, it could even be like the king or something. It's like, oh, we can actually talk to this dude, because he's out down in here. And you can also use it to cement the party in the area, without it being, a huge lore dump. It's an experience for them, both as players and characters.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a nice, like you said, just like it is in real life, a way to break up the kind of everyday monotony. It's a really good way of doing that in game as well. Whenever you think about social encounters in the context of a game like Dungeons and Dragons, it's typically a negotiation with somebody, with high ranking noble, or a powerful merchant, or the leader of a thieves guild. That's kind of what social encounters tend to kind of be in games of Dungeons and Dragons, and this is definitely a big departure from those. The stakes aren't as high. You don't have to worry about failing a roll as much or something like that if you're even rolling. But I think that can be fun too, though. Working in interesting ways to mechanically celebrate the encounter of a festival in your game, finding things for the players to physically do with their dice. But I also think that like downtime is always important to include in ongoing campaigns, especially, but it can become rote to simply just buy more arrows or more healing potions or get drunk at a tavern or whatever. It kind of falls into the same old and most of the time,
shopping episode.
yeah, exactly.
not
Most of the time
the
just,
shopping, another one.
Most of the time it just ends up being hand waved. It's just like, yeah, that's fine, just this is how much it costs, get what you need, and then you're going to roll through this town. And I think holidays and festivals kind of give you a chance to present downtime in a way that's truly unique. It kind of allows you to showcase the cultural richness of your setting, and also kind of giving players a memorable way to spend that downtime. It's a really good place to kind of push the flavor of a setting.
Yeah, I mean, in a given area too.
Yeah, absolutely. A really useful way to even maybe showcase the stark differences between a culture, like a new culture that somebody has ventured off into. The way that spring is celebrated where you're from, but here it's this drastically different. Every bit as entrenched in time and dedication and tradition as your traditions, just vastly different. And that's always really fun for me as a dungeon master and as a player, is to find ways to showcase a culture. The old adage of show not tell. I really enjoy finding ways to kind of give the culture to the players to interact with. instead of just kind of telling them the way that things look.
Yeah, for sure. You can use it to definitely like emphasize things you want, and you can also use it just for like certain story beats that you really want to get through.
Yeah, that's another really good idea. Use it for setting, future plot hooks, because people have, there's a lot of people that are usually kind of congregated into an area that they might not normally. The population typically booms around the time of a holiday or festival. Um, People are typically drinking and in better spirits, so tongues are looser. Um, so yeah, I think that's a really smart way to kind of build an encounter around a holiday or a festival is, you know, the the potential bag of plot hooks that they could find and engage with. Um, yeah, that's a really cool way to incorporate it. I like that. One of the questions that we have came from Tim Carney, and he asks, "How do you keep holidays from just being a set of customs, decorations, and food? How can you really bring them to life so that they're meaningful, pardon me, and not just take it or leave it set dressing?"
That's a really good question. Uh, I think kind of going into like tying it into like it's like just having a spring festival is like, okay, well, you don't have to participate in that, but like what if your character is from the town, like, or someone's character is from this town that they're celebrating the spring festival, then it's important that you can, if you tie it into someone's backstory or like their location, it can the take it or leave it mentality. There does come a point where there has to be some kind of player buy-in, regardless of what you're doing, and you can definitely help that along by incorporating the story into it. We kind of touched base on like the other stuff that we kind of talked about. Uh, I think also having it. My brain just fizzled. It's this
I
hat.
just took a holiday.
It's the Santa hat. It's raw.
Fine.
There's nothing but cookies in the hat.
Damn, mine doesn't have any cookies.
But yeah, there's like the buy-in that players need, and I do think you can make it more than just a way to do it is to have like you said, where different locations celebrate the holiday differently, or there's enough of a difference, like there's a marked difference and how you celebrate it. Maybe not like, oh, it's an entirely new thing. It's like, oh, they've taken this one thing and they've twisted it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's also a really good place to do the you tell me thing as a dungeon master, right? To say, okay, this is kind of what I have established, these 2 or 3 beats about this particular festival or holiday, but why don't we go around the table and each of you add something, an event that happens, a dish that's prepared, something that is, brought out or carried around by people, just add something to this, or maybe even just like a reason as to why some of these might happen or the beliefs behind them, add something to that. That's one of the surefire ways that I have found to create player buy-in, is to literally pass the ball to the players and say, why don't you put your stamp on this? Add something to it, add something to the world that will become canon. And most of the time, what ends up coming back is something that's really cool. Somebody mentions something, and then the next person builds on that, and and by the end of it, you have something that's usually very rich and unique, because it's not something that your mind would have come up with on its own. It's often far better, and everybody's excited to see how their I just lost the word. See, now I have cookies. Their particular stamp, their mark, to see how that plays out, how that might come up in the future.
I mean, I think another way you can do it is think of like I'm going to use Christmas because we're close to it. There's also a lot of Christmas movies. Everyone kind of knows how Christmas goes down, but some of my favorite Christmas movies, and there's going to be some flack for this, are Christmas movies that have something like a twist on it, and it's usually something like my favorite movies are Home Alone and Die Hard. And yes, Die Hard's a Christmas movie, but it's like a way you can get it is like, this is the spring festival in this town, and everyone's like, okay, it's a spring festival in this town, cool. It's like, why is there a green dragon carrying off the king of the hunt? And you're like, oh shit. Like, this is not according to plan. I know how this festival goes. It doesn't involve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the great things about putting festivals and holidays into a fantasy world, or a sci-fi world, even for that matter, is that it can be so drastically different. You can see, again, falling back on things that I've talked about in the show before, but I'm a big proponent of leaning into tropes, using them, using that common language that's been established through something becoming a trope or a cliche, but then make it your own. Start with that as a basis. Use the expectations of the people at your table that you're using that trope, so they go, oh, I know what this is. Okay, I've seen this, or I've read this, or whatever. But then you use that expectation to make a twist, make it your own. So then they're going, oh, okay. It's really cool. I've, read about the Headless Horseman before, but I never really thought about it being, 3 goblins in a coat, or whatever.
Yeah.
You can do something really different and unique with it, and use that. And you can do the same thing with holidays, use a real world holiday from a real culture, and put a twist on it.
Yeah.
Let me see what else. How do you keep holiday? I'm going to try to see if I can answer Tim's question on my own too. How do you make them meaningful? So the same way that I think you should handle culture, especially if you're basing on real world cultures, is treat it with respect. If you treat it with respect, your players are a lot more likely to treat it as something that's meaningful and real, instead of just, the butt of a joke. I think if you're going to use real world cultures, real world religions, real world traditions, that if you do so from a place of respect, and you do what you can to try to educate yourself about it, then I think it's okay if you do it lovingly. And I think having the NPCs treat the holiday and the festivities with the proper amount of, I guess reverence would be the term, in their world, then I think the players most of the time will pick up on that, and will match step with you. As far as for making them more engaging, like, give your players, again, mechanically something to do, an archery contest, or a foot race, or a great hunt, or a myriad of different things. The color festival that happens in India, you could actually have them rolling dice and things to see what color comes out of the sachet that they just threw. Make it fun, make it gameable. And I think that most of the time, that's something that your players will remember in the future.
Yeah. It's also kind of to piggyback a bit off of that, you can use it as a way to cement the history of your world. Where we think of like Santa Claus as this fictional person, but there's some credence to his origin. And in a fantasy world, that could have been a real person who does this, and you can use like, oh, why do we do this? And then you can tell them like the kid's story, but in there's that suspension of disbelief that can happen in role playing games where you're like, well, what if he's real? Like, what if he is actually real and it's not just something we tell children?
That's exactly what I mean about kind of taking those tropes and giving it a little bit of a spin. I have a setting that I run games in sometimes called Downland, which is a mixture of like Oz and Wonderland with kind of a dark kind of coat of paint over the whole thing. And Santa is real in that setting. He was a very powerful wizard who struggled with a lot of his anger. And he set about and found a ritual that he could cast that would actually suppress his anger and get it under control. And what happened is, unfortunately, all of that got compressed and sectioned off basically into a separate entity. And that became Krampus. And then he, racked with guilt, has basically had to spend the entire rest of his days trying to hunt down this entity and stop that from being a problem. So I love doing that kind of stuff in my settings. I think that's a lot of fun to play on expectations. But yeah, I actually have a question that I had drawn up that's actually kind of expounds on what we're talking about a little bit. So nearly all holidays are tied to myths and legends of some sort. And obviously, in our world, the reality of these mythologies is often a subject of debate or speculation. But in a world, like you said, where magic and the supernatural are commonplace, how can this shape these kinds of celebrations?
I mean, I think it makes the holidays and like traditions around them a lot more important. I mean, if there's the tradition of leaving out baked goods so the boogeyman doesn't steal your kids, like in our world, it's like, okay, whatever. But in like a fantasy world, you make the thing real. And then everyone leaves out baked goods. Some of them even leave out stuff for neighbors because they like their neighbors' kids. Some of them don't. Some of them steal like their baked goods because they want the kids to be gone. You can totally cement it.
That's
Like
dark. I
you
like
can
that.
totally like do that thing where it's like, oh, okay, someone stole the bread that I left out for evil Santa, and now I don't have kids anymore. That kind. It's like, oh shit, and that it just makes it so that traditions are so much more important, have such a bigger impact, but that can also kind of make a deeper like a deeper meaning for us, the people of that kind of a world. Traditions is probably even more important in that kind of a world, and it's harder for them to break their ways, both good and bad. And I think that, I mean, this is kind of going into my own little bit of world building, but that kind of thing, there's a thing in a lot of, I've noticed in a lot of role playing games and a lot of fantasy in general. It's like thousands of years have passed, and it's like, okay, why has nothing really changed? Like, I get like there's a technology ramp, but like if you look back at like, I'm not a Tolkien expert, but like there's ages, sure, but they beside of like this, besides who is the stewards and who are the people in the land, the land doesn't the land and like the situation doesn't really change for thousands of years. And like this
Yeah.
could be one of the ways to going in and like explaining that, is that if you break certain traditions, really bad things happen. And so there's not enough room for growth or change. There's just more of a like, keep the line here, and anything that goes up above that is hammered down pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the conversation about this kind of falls into the same kind of the same kind of breakdown that like real world religion, transmitting into gaming. or just religion in general. Real world religions, obviously, most of it is very difficult to prove one way or another. A lot of it is based purely on faith and faith alone, belief, and that's it. And in a fantasy world where, oftentimes the gods are real entities, they can reach out and manipulate things. They can talk to people. They can, show up in front of people. When, priests pray to them, there's literally like a visual and auditory effect that happens. So it kind of changes a lot about the kind of the fundamentals of something. And I think holidays are very much kind of the same thing. The traditions and the rituals that are observed for any kind of given holiday or festival, like you said, would be a lot more concrete. There's like you said, there's a defined specific reason why we sacrifice 10 goats. There's a very good reason why we have to do that. And it's understood that that's just kind of the way that it is. So you can introduce a lot of really interesting, again, plot hooks like you're talking about, where, somebody comes through and steals this very special bread that was supposed to have been left out. Why? Who did it? Where is it? Can we get it back in time? And I think it's a really interesting way to pull conflict into your game that doesn't necessarily have to be a direct combat. It doesn't have to be something that they can literally just come up to and sling spells and swing their swords at. It might be a little bit more investigative. They have to discover what the tradition is, or maybe why, and who could have benefited from breaking the tradition. And I think it's a really interesting way to kind of look at a holiday or a festival. Cool. So the other preloaded question that we had from the audience is actually from my wife, Jamie, and she asks, would different cultures within the same setting celebrate the same holiday differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just as in our own world, like we have different cultures that celebrate the same holiday differently. There's different meals for different cultures on like the same holiday. It's like a different thing. Like at least for me, it's Western America. Thanksgiving turkey is a big deal, but that's not the same for everyone. And then very specifically, indigenous people do not celebrate Thanksgiving for a multitude of reasons. They do. It's like a remembrance day, and they do certain activities during that, and it's different. It's a whole different mood because it's very understanding to why. It's just it's a different thing to do, and so you have to approach it for what does it mean to them. Like a community might celebrate kind of like worshiping a deity, like for stereotypically like dwarves worshiping a forge god just because they worship, they are forgers. But what if that deity wasn't just the god of like forge, but is the god of creation, like of creation and like making and creativity? So like you would have elves in a forest who worship that same god building furniture or bows or stuff like that. It's all about, you have to put it into context for these different groups.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that's a really good way to like you said, to kind of illustrate the culture dynamics, between different groups of people. It's a really easy way to inject flavor into a culture when you're here. Like when people are celebrating a festival or a holiday, like a lot of times all the stops have been pulled out. They wear different clothes that have been, prepared for weeks or months. They cook dishes that they don't normally cook for the rest of the year. Thanksgiving is another example. I can't tell you the last time that I had someone cook an entire turkey that wasn't on Thanksgiving. That's very specific to that holiday. I don't eat cranberry sauce at any other time of the year, and
Yeah.
I could, I just don't. Um, and I think that's because these traditions are being observed, and people are going above and beyond, because it's a special time.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that it's an interesting way to showcase a culture and tradition.
For sure.
Um, let's see here. So, okay, speaking of traditions, one of my other questions has to deal with that. So we'll just hop right over into that. So, a large part of holidays and festivals is about upholding traditions, whether they're religious traditions, cultural traditions, familial traditions, personal traditions, but everything from the food we eat to what decorations it is that we put up to what it is that we wear to the songs that we sing to the rituals that we decide that we take part in. Why, in your opinion, is tradition specifically such a strong focal point in these kinds of celebrations?
Um, I think tradition is, um, it can be used as or tradition comes about as a part of like repetition. And for a lot of people in communities or even like just family units, they're informed of these traditions because, oh well, my father did it and his father did it before me, and so forth and so on. And it's a way to look back at what you know, and that's another reason why it's so hard to break tradition for a good number of people, is because this is the way it's always been done. And for some people, like having that family connection for holidays and rituals is a good thing. It's a positive memory, and for other people it's negative. But from what I've seen and experienced firsthand, is when you have negative experience with traditions, you make your own traditions and rituals around those holidays, and then that becomes the thing that you do, and that's your tradition for that given holiday. And it's a different way that you celebrate or counterculture that celebration.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. It's very informative on you if you experienced it when you were growing up. Obviously, if it wasn't something that was celebrated in your house, then you would probably not have strong feelings about it one way or the other.
Mhm.
Um, and it is funny how deeply ingrained a lot of that kind of stuff is. Just as an example, once again, kind of using Christmas because it's just that time of year again. Like I grew up in a house that always had the multicolored lights on the Christmas tree. That was the
Okay.
tradition at my house growing up. My wife grew up in a household where they only did white lights on the Christmas tree. So whenever we first moved in together, that was a point of contention around the holiday season. Like every year, we'd be like, "What are we doing? Like, are we putting multicolored lights or are we putting white lights?" And so we started alternating years so that both of us could kind of compromise and have a middle happy ground, a happy middle ground rather. But eventually, I just kind of started to realize that it doesn't really matter. Like it ultimately, part of that is just that innate nature to kind of hold on to tradition. And I think you touched on it. It's rooted in memory. It's rooted in nostalgia. In harkening back to when my childhood was fantastic and happy and great. It's kind of maybe I can tap into some of that if I just kind of go through these steps of this ritual the way that we did. Still believing in somewhat of the magic of the ritual itself.
Yeah.
Um, it's just funny how our brains work like that. But like you said, forming your own traditions is also really awesome. And as time goes on, some traditions have to change.
Mhm.
They become not simply antiquated, but just they become out of touch.
Yeah.
And in a world that evolves, sometimes the way that we celebrate needs to evolve as well.
100%.
Okay, we have a question here from. Um, I never know whether to use people's screen names or to just use their actual names. So I just default to using people's actual names, and I know that's probably not cool, but so this question comes from Nathan. Um, uh, do you recommend making your own holidays and festivals or using known ones? How would you start creating believable holidays?
Um, so I think it's perfectly acceptable to use um, holidays that already exist or festivals. It's there's nothing wrong with it if that's in your world. I mean, isn't it? There's a bunch of fantasy worlds that use like our calendar, and it's like that doesn't make any sense. Like for you to use that, like I think Lord of the Rings uses our calendar. I'm not 100%. Don't come at me, nerds.
You might be right.
Like they use Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's like that. Why? There's no Odin in Lord of the Rings.
Probably for the same reason they speak English. It's
Yeah,
just
I mean, yeah, it's an easy shorthand, which so it's perfectly fine to use your own. You can make your own. I've take the hard road in a lot of things, and I try to make my own stuff. There's a really good video for making your own holiday from Dale Kingsmill about making holidays, about believable holidays, and I recommend that to anyone watching this. Not right now, don't watch it now. But Dale Kingsmill has a great video, kind of going into the entire depth of making a holiday. Um, I personally made holidays before I came on to this episode because I just wanted to. I wanted to, and I hadn't done it the whole lot before. I have a few, but I made more. So, but to kind of go without making you go watch another video, I think the main thing that you want to do is kind of start from like a base point of holidays. So use that shorthand that we know. Like around Christmas time. It doesn't need to be Christmas time. It can be the winter solstice because that's a thing. That's a real thing. That's probably more in line with how it was originally, before all kinds of stuff happened to it. It was a celebration of the shortest day of the year in the winter. And then the midsummer is the same way. And then the you start with like the basics, the four of like the beginning of the year, the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the beginning of spring, and the beginning of fall are kind of like your big go-tos. And you can take little pieces that you do know and then just kind of drop them in and then change them. um, and I think that's a good way. Find something that since if you're running the game, find something that you like about a certain holiday, and then you can just make that the key. Like on Halloween, candy's cool, horror cool. I really like masks. You can just have a holiday. There are real life holidays about masks that you can just have. Like it's just like a mask making like thing that everyone wears a mask. It's like that's fun. That's cool. Do that. It doesn't have to be this big, showy, like Macy's Day Parade float of an event. It can be small and intimate. And in my opinion, a lot of those things, they're more impactful when they're specific and small. Like a bouillon cube. It's condensed down into a single thing instead of it being this huge, extravagant thing that you have to describe everything. If I just say, oh, this is the mask making festival, everyone's out, getting wood and carving masks, and they have paint and stuff like that, and you can buy your own mask and paint it and stuff. Like, oh, cool, we can just do that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a spectrum of the level of involvedness, I guess, is how you'd say,
Mhm.
of holidays, even in our own culture. Obviously, Christmas is one of the ones that's just blown out of the water. It's celebrated for 3 months. Here in the United States. People buying their decorations. Putting things on layaway and shit. And there's, like you said, tons of movies and songs, and so Christmas is a huge holiday here in the United States. And President's Day, not so much. You know, it's still a holiday, technically. I'm sure there are people who do celebrate it in some fashion or another. But it's not the same magnitude, you know, of Christmas.
I
At
mean,
least
I'm
in
sure
most
there's a
people.
YouTube video somewhere of two dudes wearing like president masks instead of Santa hats. It's just
Next,
not this video.
next on the help action. That's hilarious.
Was it the movie Heat with Val
Oh, I love that
Kilmer,
movie.
where they have the president masks? Is that the one that I'm thinking of?
No, that's Point Break.
Oh, Point Break.
Point Break.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Heat is the one where they're wearing suits and sunglasses.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and they have the shootout on the street.
Heat is one of my favorite movies. I love Heat. Point Break's a good movie too, but very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see a mashup between those two. Not really. Don't do it, internet.
It's too late. You've put it out in the world.
Now it exists. What have I done? Yeah, it's. I'm trying to remember where we were. Yeah.
We were answering Dimension 119's
yes.
questions.
Yes, Nathan's question here. It's right here on the screen. If only somebody had like put it out so that I could read it. Making your own holidays. Yeah, I think it's a good thought exercise to do at least some of your own, because it kind of can teach you what you need and what you don't, as far as like creating content for your players at the table, while also kind of understanding kind of like the reasons why. Because if you can kind of come up with that stuff, it's a lot easier to portray it as a real thing, as a living, breathing feature of your setting. But like Ben said, starting with a foundation, a basis is a really good idea. One of my favorite things to do is if I decide that I want to include a holiday, and I'm going to base it in a specific culture's interpretation of the holiday or whatever, is I'll go to, you know, the trusty dusty Wikipedia, and basically just research as many iterations of that one holiday as I can, and just go through there and cherry pick and say, oh, this is really cool. I never knew that they did that over, you know, on that side of the world. Or, oh, why did they do this? Why do they eat this particular food? And then I kind of try to take those pieces and build something of my own that is kind of an amalgamation of my version of that holiday. And then especially if I can take something from like the culture, like if it's a different race, like a, you know, particular sect of elves or, you know, dwarves, as we kind of talked about earlier, if I can kind of work in something about them into the holiday as well, I typically try to go with that angle. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. There was another question that came in. Here we go, from David Easley. Not a holiday per se, but what are your thoughts on birthday style celebrations in game? That's a really good question.
I think it could be done. It's, if you're talking about like player, oh, never mind. For characters, I think it could be fun. It might be a good thing to like set up with that player beforehand. Like if you want, like, you know, it's one of those things where you don't want to spring it on the player in the session. Like, oh, you can have the idea, oh, I think it'd be cool for, you know, the barbarian's birthday to be in the middle of the session and for it to come up and be relevant. That can put spotlight on that player that they might not want. So, you know, if that's kind of a case by case basis, I think it's perfectly fine. It wouldn't. I mean, it could be fun to do like the big, like spoiled princess birthday, you know, where like a pony comes out and it's like the literal princess's birthday, and the entire city is just gonna be like, yay. You know, that might be a fun thing to kind of like incorporate, where it's like, it's my daughter's birthday. And it's like, happy birthday, Princess Esmeralda. You know, that kind of, you know, or if they like her, it's like, oh, okay, cool.
It's even better when that is also the barbarian's birthday.
Yeah,
That gets
it's
awkward.
completely overshadow. Yeah, but that's the thing, is like you could talk about it, you know, case by case. I think it's perfectly fine to do birthdays style celebrations, and you can use it as a way to like maybe like get that player to explore their backstories. Like, okay, well, if we're gonna celebrate a birthday, what kind of things would your character's culture be a part of? Would it be uh you know, a day of celebration, or would it be a day of like remembrance for like all the family members that allowed you to get there? And so it's just kind of actually more solemn situation.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's the kind of thing where, um, if the player's okay with it, obviously,
Mhm.
uh, most cultures, I think, celebrate some form of recognition for a another year passing, a birthday or naming day, or whatever it is that they may call it. Um, so I think that it stands to reason that most cultures as a standard would probably have something like that, even in a fantasy world. Now, elves and dwarves who have lived for hundreds of years, they may not
Yeah.
celebrate them anymore. And again, always as a personal choice, a character may just either not know or decide that it's just not important to them. So I think checking with your players is always a good idea. But also, like, if you want to build a session around like having a birthday party, and you don't want it to be an NPC, it's always okay to just kind of soft plan that as okay, there's going to be a birthday celebration of a PC, and then when the moment comes up in the game, just ask for a volunteer. Just say, hey, whose character's having a birthday? And then just whoever the first person that speaks up, or roll a die and the highest wins, or what have you, then you just roll forward. The details might not have to be important or decided ahead of time, and you can kind of do that after you've gotten that volunteer, and that's perfectly viable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also for like the longer lived races, like you mentioned, dwarves and elves, maybe they don't celebrate every year, but maybe like every decade or every century instead.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
and then like we as a human society, we not may not celebrate certain birthdays after a certain point, but like when people get really old, like when they reach 100, there's lots of people that throw parties for that. Probably not
For sure.
that person who's turning 100's idea, but it's like, oh, we're gonna celebrate, and they're like, no. But it like that kind of a situation, you could bring that in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think celebrating specific ones makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, sorry, my mind is kind of like going off into all kinds of different directions
All
now.
good.
Um, yeah, this is fun. I love talking about this kind of stuff. It's holidays and festivals are the kind of thing that I think about sometimes
Hmm.
ish, but they're not typically the thing that I sit down and go like, okay, I need 16 holidays. What am I gonna do? That's just not typically the way that my brain builds my worlds. Um, but there is a really important one in the campaign that I'm currently running here on the channel, called Evermore La Masquerade, and it is a kind of amalgamation of Mardival, or it's called Mardival, but it's kind of Mardi Gras, Carnival, kind of thrown into one, and then kind of turned up to 11 and yanking the knob out. So
Oh,
it's really wild, and it's there's a lot of debauchery that goes on, and everybody wears a mask, so there's all this anonymity, and it's very much a celebration of fertility, of the springing of life coming back in, and all of that kind of stuff. And adversely, they have one that's during the fall, the harvest, that is very somber and very about reminiscing and about their ancestors, and the thinning of the veil of life and between the world of living and the dead, all that kind of stuff, all thrown into a pot. Um, so when it's something that becomes important in a setting, I really like delving into this kind of detail with a world. Um, okay, I have one more question here, and then we'll see if we have any others that come in from the audience. Let's see here. Um, so many real-world holidays stem from marking the passage of time and the seasons, with considerable overlap that kind of tends to transcend geographical location and time. The celebration of the equinoxes is something that we touched on, and the solstices is beyond ancient and is fairly universal. But for me, like you mentioned, this is kind of an absolute baseline.
Yeah.
Basically, every setting that I make, if I'm going to include festivals and holidays, it's at least going to have those four, some kind of version of those four. Do you have a similar baseline that you use, and why or why not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have those exact days, or like the big one, the big holidays, the different times of the year, the equinoxes. Um, and I think something that might come up, like the cycle of the moon for your world, or moons, because a lot of people have different multiple moons. There's a thing. For my world, my homebrew world of Rakshay, there are actually two moons of my world, but one is almost invisible. It's small. Uh, and there's an event. It's a celestial event that takes place every 39 years called the Hag's Eye Moon. And it's where that small moon passes in front of the other one. So it looks like an eye watching the thing. And there's several rituals that are performed, or like are things that go around that. There's actual power in that because of uh, because of what that small moon actually is in my setting, and the fact that you basically only see it once every 4 decades. Um, that, and kind of going to that, I think it's really good to use celestial events for holidays and just in general in adventures, because there's so much you can pull from that. From constant, like a big thing for me was using like constellations as kind of like a thing. But I think it's interesting because if you take a step back from that, like in a sci-fi setting, especially one that involves space travel, how do equinoxes come and play? Because the equinoxes are for a planet, for like that specific planet. So how would it work in space travel? So you'd have to think of like other ways that things interact there, and that's something to kind of think about when you zoom that far out.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't really thought about that. Like my brain still has a hard enough time wrestling with the fact that people in Australia celebrate Christmas in the middle of their summer.
Summer, yeah.
Like it's the wildest shit in my mind. So it's talking about leaving the planet and going into outer space and how that's going to affect your experience of seasons. Um,
Mhm.
you know, at the very least, yeah, that's wild. And I don't know. I can't even wrap my head around how holidays and things would would evolve with
Mhm.
terraforming other planets and traveling through outer space, especially if you like left our solar system. Um, that's wild. And I guess a lot of that would probably fall back on tradition. It's
Mhm.
going to literally become mainly just about doing it the way that they've always done it, and then that would slowly change and evolve as the society did and its expectations. But that's wild. Um, yeah, and I think again that the passage of time, the marking of the passage of time, is where a lot of these traditions and festivals and rituals come from. It's one of the reasons why almost every culture in the world celebrates the solstices and the equinoxes. A lot of these things were done tied to religion a lot of the times because it helped explain natural phenomenon. The days getting shorter. The fact that there were eclipses. Plants that were dead now springing back to life all of a sudden. These things were things that people didn't understand how to explain. So they invented all of these really rich stories that evolved, through oral tradition, through generation after generation, until they became, a living myth. And these rituals kind of sprung up to support those myths, either to, ward off the bad things about it or to invite the good things about it. And a lot of that has to do with, again, the passage of time, the changing of the seasons throughout your year, the marking of the moon. I think that the Hagazai moon is brilliant. I laughed because in one of the worlds that I run my games in, it has 3 moons, but only 2 of them are visible. So I thought that was pretty funny whenever you said that. It's cool. But I love that kind of stuff. Rooting your festivals and in your holidays in kind of a similar springboard, the passage of time, the movement of celestial bodies, the explanation of natural and supernatural phenomenon, that helps to give your setting, your fantasy setting, that history where it's rooted in an old way. It brings it back to that medieval era where a lot of things are done because of superstition, or because the outside world around this little village is so scary and unknown. I think that's a really good way to kind of capture that in a vivid and creative way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's all I have, Ben. So, man, this has been awesome. It's been a really good conversation, and there's been a lot of fantastic stuff that you have touched on. So, I think we're gonna look towards wrapping this up. Is there anything that you want to say or plug again to anybody who's out there?
I think the people that know about it already with the Buckstar games that I mentioned previously got the 2 supplements with the Barganomicon and Jaws of the King Expedition. They're both on Drivethrurpg, and both of them are under $10.
So if you're looking for some almost last minute gifts, there you go. He's got you set up. They are incredible products, Ben. You should be very proud. It's not easy to put together a supplement.
No.
And you have done it twice, and both of them look fantastic. You've pulled together a lot of fantastic art to support your ideas and your writing.
Yeah, a lot of that credit's got to go to Dakota Curry and Lucas Ferreira, who are the artists that worked on both books, and then John Pintar, who's worked on some of the Absolute Tabletop, did covers for both those books.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I'm not to that stage. I've sat down and tried doing it a few times, and daunting is a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's finding, like, sitting down and thinking about doing it and planning out is one thing. There's a lot of information that's just not, at least for me, it wasn't readily available on how to do those things. So I just had to teach myself and power through to get those.
Yeah, I hear that. Streaming has very much kind of been that same journey for me, having to teach myself how to do all this, and why isn't this working, and why is this thing that was working now no longer working. Yeah, it's been a fun ride, but I'm really thankful that you agreed to come on and be a guest for this episode of Help Action, and to sit down and chit chat with me for a bit.
Yeah, of course, it was awesome.
I agree, man. It was a good conversation, and again, I love talking about RPG stuff. It's always one of the best things about doing these shows. Not only do I get to talk about RPGs, but I get to kind of take a deeper dive and get to know people from the community a little bit better. It's a lot of fun. So everybody who tuned in this evening, thank you so much for watching. Whether you watched live with us this evening, or whether you may be watching at some point in the future, it is very, very much appreciated. If you like this kind of stuff, like button, subscribe, all that stuff. Share it around on social media. post stickers on locker room. I don't know. I don't know what people do anymore. I'm so old, it doesn't matter. No, I love you all. I hope that whatever holiday that you may be celebrating this year, that it is done so safely and with nothing but joy, and that those that you gather around you, bring you a lot of happiness, and you for them. And until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.